This June, the UK was well hot. A report issued in June 2026 by the Met Office, which is the body in the UK which measures weather, uses a lot of words like exceptionally and unusually, which is all to say that June 2026 broke all sorts of records. Wales broke its temperature record by more than 2 degrees, and England set a provisional record. Even more bizarrely, Northern Ireland managed to equal its record for June temperatures. But one thing jumped out at me in this report. The year 1976 keeps getting mentioned. You see, summer 1976 is well remembered in the UK as being, until now, the hottest June since records began. Feels like you hear that phrase a lot, and I'll tell you for why that is. June is a month, of which research tells me there are 12, and that these happen every year. Every single one of these was an opportunity for that to be the hottest version of that month since records began. Then there's every single place that measures temperature. Each one of these has a record temperature since records began. Check out this excellent slice of internet, which is all about one of the oldest weather stations in the UK. Seriously, read it. It's great. Link below. Anyway, 1976 was well hot. I'm going to go and record an intro to that effect now. Welcome to Balsam Bashing. Now look, I know it's always been hot. My family goes on about the summer of 76 as though it was the heat wave to end all heat waves. But it wasn't.
Britain is sweltering through one of the most intense heat waves.
Heat wave.
Heat wave.
Heat wave.
Heat wave.
But look at this. The
Heat wave.
Heat waves.
Heat wave.
Heat wave.
heat wave.
Heat wave.
Red heat alert.
But while the summer is unpredictable these days, fortunately some things about the summer are still entirely predictable. Like the river near me. It's going to be low at this time of year, revealing all the previous possessions that people loved and chucked in the river. And then you've got the balsam, which is doggedly making its way through this heat wave. We had a sprinkle of rain last night, so it's looking pretty fresh. Crafty bugger. Another thing that isn't struggling in the heat are all the so-called weeds. All of these flowers are native species, and these here are the especially tough ones. This is a path near me, and just in this space we've got stuff like thistle, which I think is great. And then there's willow herb and the dreaded bindweed. And then there's this yellow one, ragwort. Ragwort can kill horses, but there's not many of those around here, so I think we're okay. While all the weeds are having fun in the sun, plenty of the natural world is suffering. The summer has just begun, but wildfires all over the place are already causing chaos. The UK just broke its record for the amount of wildfires in a single year in 2 out of the last 5 years. Now, lots of things cause wildfires. Lightning is the retro/vintage source of wildfires, but now fire has the advantage of our laziness to really help it along its way. Barbecues, cigarettes, and even glass bottles can start wildfires. So, given that we're so good at starting wildfires anyway, you might be surprised to learn that some people in this country just set fire to the whole lot, on purpose, and don't get in trouble.
Cool burns can dry peat over
understand
time.
it, to manage it.
Campaigners like Wild
Think
Moors
about it.
describe
This
it
is
bluntly.
what my moor
When peat is burned,
would
it
look
dries
like.
out
So
and
get your
loses
facts
the
straight
flavor
for
a
you.
lot
What
more
they say.
slowly.
What
Well,
they
then
say.
we are moving away from.
Now look, I'm not here to have a go at grouse hunters or farmers or anybody like that, but where are you watching from? Anyway, look, I'm clearly out of my depth. Let's go and find somebody who knows what they're talking about. Hello, Johnny. Thank you very much for making the time. I really appreciate that.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'd like to start by asking you if it's ever frustrating when someone emails you asking for an interview and repeatedly spells the word Peat wrongly.
No, we're quite used to that. That's fine, yeah.
I appreciate that. I appreciate your sympathy with that one. I realised yesterday I was quite embarrassed. Why might I be asking you about Peat? Johnny, tell us a bit about your background.
Okay, so I mean, this is a kind of a lifetime affair for me. So my father and my uncle were both peat diggers in the 1970s. And I've spent the last sort of 15 years of my career trying to undo all the work that them and their colleagues did in the 1970s before we kind of understood what important and unique environments these were. And, you know, when climate change was not such a big issue.
Can I just go back to something you said? Did you say you had a family history of peat digging?
Yeah. Small-scale extraction of peat for fuel has been going on for centuries and centuries and centuries. Still occurs in extremely small scale in the UK. A lot more of it in Ireland. But essentially, if you dig peat soil out, you dry it, and then you can burn it on your fire instead of coal. And, you know, 200, 300 years ago, there would be whole villages and towns in the UK that would be fueled by peat, essentially. As time's gone on, coal kind of put an end to peat extraction for fuel on a commercial scale, but there's still been peat extraction for horticulture, so for use in growing medium, for use in compost. And the whiskey industry up in Scotland also still digs peat to actually smoke the malt. And that's how you get those smoky, peaty malt flavours. So yeah, so my dad and my uncle were doing that in the 1970s, cutting the peat face, drying it out, and then it was being used for fuel.
Why is this at all important? I mean, obviously it's important to you. Peatlands are what you have spent your life's work on, but for the rest of us, why is peat important?
So peatlands are essentially an extremely organic matter-rich soil, so very large amounts of carbon. And they're a unique soil because instead of their kind of, in a normal soil, you kind of have a balance of new litter being added from plants, but then sort of decomposition, releasing the carbon again, you kind of get this equilibrium. And peatlands are fundamentally out of that equilibrium. So what we get is layer of new plant material being added each year, but extremely slow decomposition. So that material adds up over thousands and thousands of years. And what we get is these organic profiles that can be, say, 8 meters deep. And it's just basically pure carbon. And the reason we get that is because of waterlogging. So essentially because peatlands occur in very wet places, we get waterlogging, which slows the decomposition of the plant material. And that's why peatlands are this kind of unique system where you just get year after year of plant material being added on, creating these really deep peat profiles. So yeah, you have, for example, in a typical arable field, you might have an organic profile that's maybe 3, 4, 5% carbon, and it's only about 30 centimetres deep. Whereas we're going out in some of our sites in Wales and we're measuring an 8 metre deep profile.
Wow.
That's basically all carbon.
Wow,
so,
that's incredible.
Yeah. Fundamentally, if we keep these habitats in good condition, every year they're sequestering more carbon for us. But in poor conditions, so for example, if they've been drained for agriculture, for forestry, or there's been erosion started to occur, the water tables drop, oxygen starts getting into the soil, thousands of years worth of carbon just start being released. In Wales, peatlands store 30% of land carbon, and it does it in only 4% of the land area. So it's a real oversized kind of contribution to the carbon budget. But unfortunately, 90% of peatlands in Wales are in a degraded state, which means by and large, they're actually emitting carbon rather than sequestering it, which is what peatlands is kind of so great at doing.
It's scary stuff to think about, but I'm sure there's good notes. I was reading around about peat bog restoration a little bit in relation to heat waves and wildfires. Tell us a bit about how they relate, Johnny. Is there much of a relationship there?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's some very, very basic physics of wet things are harder to burn. Yeah, and that's the very, very basic sort of thing of why peatland restoration helps wildfires. And we've seen that at a couple of sites recently in Wales where NRW has been involved in restoration, both ourselves and with partners. So at Grouse and in the Elan Valley, we've had incidences where there's been wildfire that's kind of swept along the valley. It gets to areas where we've restored, where there's in some cases standing water, and very, very wet peatland area. And essentially the wildfire has stopped there. So it's acted as an effective fire break. So it is definitely a tool in the box for kind of increasing resilience to wildfire, but it's not a silver bullet, I'm afraid.
No, absolutely. There doesn't seem to be any silver bullets out there for combating something like that.
It's got to be a kind of holistic approach, and fundamentally a huge part of it is educating the public. The majority of wildfires in the UK aren't wild in a strict sense of the word. They are set by people, either accidentally or on purpose, and that's a huge part of it. Trying to limit the ignitions that happen. I think there's a huge kind of social science story about how we reach people and make them more aware of the risk of what they can do, of the damage they can cause if they have a barbecue while they're out on a walk or that kind of thing. So that's one aspect to it. Yeah, what can we do? Peatland restoration, increase resilience, decrease the risk of spread, and also there is things to do about fuel load management as well, particularly where we have drier systems where there's a lot of heather, creating a lot of standing fuel load, which can really mean that we get quite intense wildfires that spread easily when they do ignite.
It does bring me on to a point, and I don't want to get anyone in any hot water here, because I realise that there is a lot of controversy around heathlands, heathers, moorlands, and there are groups out there, should we say, who burn a lot of heather and a lot of things to the ground, for instance, for grouse hunting. I don't want to get anyone in hot water. Are you able to give us any sort of insight on how bad of a problem that is, or do you have an opinion on it?
Yeah, so just as a bit of context, so I guess from about the 1850s onwards, grouse shooting became a much popular pastime in the UK, and it's very difficult to make a blanket bog economically productive. One of the few ways you can do that and actually earn some money from it is grouse moor management. And it's an extremely effective way of kind of generating an income from what would otherwise be largely economically unproductive areas. One of the ways you do that is by basically trying to create large areas where the grouse like to live. So they like old heather to nest in, and they like younger heather to forage, eat shoots and that. So the way gamekeepers manage this is by rotational burning. So they burn small areas of the heather moorland to create this mosaic of habitats of having young heather and old heather at the same time. It creates very high fuel loads that will burn very intensely, and if you created a near monoculture of it over a whole landscape, it can potentially burn through that whole landscape. This has become quite controversial now. So in England, managed burning has been banned on deep peat. I think that's probably a positive step that it's happened in England to ban it on deep peat. It still is an acceptable management tool on shallower tools on as you get to more sort of wet heath, dry heath. But there's a kind of very valid point that it raised to kind of link to the wildfire. Is that if you stop managing these fuel loads, this heather is just going to get older and older and older, bigger and bigger and bigger, and you are potentially creating a kind of a real big problem down the road if you then have ignition. The argument from some gamekeepers would be that, so we need to be able to keep burning to manage that fuel load. And there's pluses and negatives to that. So, the problem is that the problem has been created by fire management of creating this monoculture. And the argument is now, we're kind of locked in this system, so let's just keep it in this system. And that's where the sort of argument for keeping burning is quite compelling, because whereas we're saying, if we re-wet it, it might be better in 30 years' time. We know if we go out and burn it, the fuel load will be gone by tomorrow. So it's a much more, the pace of change is completely different. So now we're in a situation where what we really need is evidence around alternative management. It's a really complicated picture. I would say, if you listen to some of the lobbying organisations like the Moorland Association, they would say that burning is the best thing since sliced bread, and would give you, a slightly biased picture in one direction. And if you listen to some of the conservation organisations, they'll tell you that burning is the worst thing that's ever been invented. So yeah, unfortunately, it's not a simplistic picture. But yeah, I would agree that overall burning is a negative thing for deep peat, and we've got to be looking for sort of ways to transition out of that as a management tool.
Absolutely we do. I'm really grateful for some nuance. I love nuance, honestly. I think it's lacking, and it's difficult for me as someone who likes to be up in arms about things, particularly as conservation things. It's difficult for me to sort of appreciate that nuance sometimes. But I will say that all of my favourite places in the UK are not economically productive. So, you know, if we could go back and explain that economically productive doesn't mean good necessarily, perhaps we'd be in a better position now. But who am I to tell the Lord of the Manor what to do with their land? What is your hope for the future of peatlands in this country, Johnny? What are your particular hopes and goals for the future?
It would be a kind of wider public understanding of what peatlands are and why they're so important for us. And I've talked about carbon a huge amount, but that's only one side of the story. You know, in Wales, peatland restoration is pushed not just by the climate, it's the dual climate and biodiversity emergencies. And that's a big part of it. These are hugely interesting landscapes from a biodiversity point of view, lots of unique species that you do not find anywhere else. And I guess, yeah, my hope and my goal would be that is considered and valued when we're making land management decisions. And I think, you know, as we've talked about, you know, about peat digging, you know, my father in the 1970s, of grouse moor management, where, you know, it's the economic value is considered, but not the wider ecological implications. I think that's long been the story of peatlands. They've been kind of treated as wastelands of, you know, those wild and windy moors of sort of Victorian literature. That was kind of seen as otherworldly places that should be tamed and value extracted from them. So yeah, for the future, that's what I would like, just a greater understanding and valuing of their sort of wonderful kind of uniqueness they can provide.
All of this stuff about peat bogs got me a bit worried. So I decided to stick on some Factor 50, go for a walk and see what I could see in the heat wave to try and cheer me up. Down the park I found this, which is called meadowsweet. And right next to it, you'd be forgiven for mixing them up, but this is common hogweed. There's a bee on it, and then there's this bug, which, having looked it up, is commonly known in England as the hogweed bonking bug, about which I was absolutely delighted. Anyway, I feel very lucky to have seen all these species up close this month, and I'm glad you have too. So, to pay it forwards, what I'm going to do is upload all of these shots and a load of other ones that I've got in the archive up to Wikimedia. That means it's free for you to use. It's a bit of a longer process than I had planned for, so I'm doing them one by one, but if you want to make a film about Himalayan balsam, or indeed the hogweed bonking bug this month, be my guest, use these shots, just give me a Creative Commons license tag at Balsam Bashing. Thank you. I'll see you soon.
I can't even
fell down.
I can't even see you.
So for the next shot, I'm going to be down here.
Come on, get out.
It's behind the scenes. I'm going to be here. Although careful, Jack, because there's quite a big drop off. Down this part of the bank.